Good morning, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome to episode 86 of the Cloudcast. Tonight, we're coming to you live from our massive Cloudcast studios here in Raleigh, North Carolina. No, not the ones above the bar, but soon. We're continuing a very recent theme, and that is platform as a service. We've received a lot of feedback from our listeners about interest in platform as a service and DevOps as a journey. So wanted to introduce tonight, first of all, we have Bart Copeland. Bart, you are the CEO, correct, of ActiveState?
I am. Thank you, Aaron. I am indeed.
Cool. And also, John, I apologize. I forgot to ask you to pronounce your last name for me before we joined.
Sure, I'll pronounce it for you. It's John Wetherall.
Very cool. And you are developer evangelist, correct, for ActiveState?
Yes, exactly.
All right. Awesome. So Bart, I wanted to, first of all, this is very intriguing to me. ActiveState as a company, we tend to talk to a lot of startups on this podcast, but you're like 100 years old in dog years. I mean, tell us a little bit about your company and the age and a little bit about the products.
Yeah, well, it's a good point. By startup perspective, startup terms, we are 100 years old, but I can assure you we are a lean, mean operation, and we are very much like a startup. But we go back as a company back to 1997. That's when ActiveState was first formed. And the company built a bunch of products based on open source. And then there was one product that really took off. It was an anti-spam product because, as we all know, spam was a real problem in the late 90s, and enterprises didn't know what to do with spam. And ActiveState came up with this really good product called Pure Message, and it became a hit with the enterprise. And Sophos acquired ActiveState in 2003. And the Pure Message product line after that acquisition has grown in excess to a $160 million a year business for Sophos. But there was a bunch of other products within ActiveState that were still great products and became orphaned within Sophos. So in 2006, I got a call from the CEO of Sophos, and the only reason he called me is I was a prior investor in ActiveState. I wasn't operationally involved, but he called me and said, Bart, you want to help me take off these orphaned employees and orphaned assets because they're great people, great products, but they just don't fit from Sophos. And I said, absolutely. So we spun off those orphaned employees and orphaned assets. We took the ActiveState brand back, and we started growing ActiveState again in 2006. But we had one mission in mind, and that was to do something great again based on our core competency. And I'm going to come to how that fits into PaaS in a minute. But we started building our business in 2006, leveraging our products. And we do three things extremely well, or we like to think we do three things extremely well. One is we understand open source. Two, we understand developers. And when we speak of a developer, we're talking about an IT DevOps person all the way up to a developer who's someone who cuts code. So a developer to us covers that full spectrum. So that's the second thing we do really well is we understand developers. And the third thing we understand really well or do well is the enterprise. And it's the intersection of those three things, open source, developers, and the enterprise is how we build our company and make money. And we've chosen to do it a little bit differently as we've grown our business organically since 2006. So we've reinvested every dollar that we make into growing the business. We've grown the business significantly. We're profitable, and we have on average, I think last year we sold to 3,000 enterprise customers globally. And where this comes into PaaS is what happened was in about, I guess it was mid-2010, we were absolutely intrigued by platform as a service. It was just starting to appear. But at that time, platform as a service was this thing that we called public platform as a service. It was outside the firewall, meaning it was Heroku, it was Engine Yard, it was Google App Engine. These were companies that were running platforms as services on either, in the case of Google App Engine, their own cloud. In the case of Engine Yard, it was running on AWS or Amazon Web Services. So we said, this is really cool. We're application guys. We understand the whole application deployment lifecycle. But we saw an opportunity in our mind, and we said enterprises, because we understand enterprises and developers with the enterprise are going to want the benefits of PaaS, but they're going to want it behind the firewall. They're going to want to be able to control it and do it in a way that makes sense for them as an organization. And we'll probably talk about this more in detail, Aaron, but the result was we started building a solution today, which is called Staccato. But when we first started building it, we were building it from scratch. But then Cloud Foundry came out in early 2011. We said, wow, this is great. This Cloud Foundry project is exactly what we're envisioning for platform as a service. More importantly, it's open source. As a company, we understand open source. So we pivoted and we started building Staccato based on top of Cloud Foundry. So today, as a company, we have a great existing business, and now we've added a new product line, and that's called Staccato. It's our enterprise private PaaS, and it's a great addition to our business. But although we're not a startup in the truest sense, we understand enterprises. We do think like a startup, and we move very quickly, and that's evident in our release cycle with Staccato. We're currently at, I think, release 2.10. So we've had numerous releases. I've lost count since we went GA of the product back in February of last year. So that's kind of just a quick summary of the history of ActiveState. And I still get a chuckle, Aaron, when you call us we're 100 years old by startup standards. I like that.
Yeah, exactly. And so John, tell me a little bit about, in your role, you certainly talk to a lot of developers. And what are some kind of big trends that you're seeing at that kind of, like you were saying, Bart, that intersection of developers and enterprise? What are some of the trends you're seeing these days?
Yeah, so the big trends that we've been seeing is the obvious ones, like big data is getting huge, and the ability for developers to access and manage and control and basically analyze that data. Very important trend, obviously. And related to that also is the whole mobile field, which generates a huge amount of data. And just opens up the ability for massive amounts of users to access applications these days. Other trends that are really coming forward these days, it seems like there's a convergence of software best practices happening. So in the past, there's all these siloed, language communities that were all doing their own thing. They all established their own practices, and they seem to be converging. So the conferences that I'm attending, I will meet just as many Java developers as JavaScript developers, as Ruby developers, etc. So there's a large movement towards kind of this polyglot world that we're in. And a couple more too. Just agility of development is extremely important, and for years we've just been mired in just ancient development practices. I guess ancient by your dog years standard, but it still is ancient. So development teams are just hindered and crippled really by the technologies they have to work with and the processes to get things running. And it's just not working anymore. So this ability to just be really agile, really quick, rapid development, without dealing with a lot of the plumbing and the underlying stuff that really a development team shouldn't be worrying about. They're specializing in building killer applications. They shouldn't be fiddling around with the plumbing. It's not really their differentiator.
Yeah, sure. And that you mentioned agility, and I just wanted to kind of briefly kind of bring back around to a conversation that we actually had before we hit the record button. So Bart and I kind of came from we found out we came from a similar background in kind of operations, primarily around factories. And we both kind of made the conclusion in reading Gene Kim's The Phoenix Project book and really the evolution of DevOps in kind of a fictional enterprise organization there. And it was just interesting for Bart and I to have a lot of the same light bulbs go off, and I actually wrote a blog post and referred it back to your blog post, and which referred it back to Gene's book. So we've got this whole Inception thing going on, all based off of factories. But Bart, if you don't mind, just real quickly tell tell everyone a little bit about kind of what we were talking about there.
Yeah, I mean, Gene Kim's book is about the whole aspect of looking at IT like it's a manufacturing process. And if you really think about it today, what IT does, it connects all the critical parts of a business together so it works really well. And symbolically, that's no different than running a manufacturing plant extremely well. And what was so compelling to me reading the Phoenix Project, is Gene and the co-authors talk about this way of looking at IT. And this is exactly how, when I started my career over 25 years ago, I started as a manufacturing engineer responsible for building digital switches for telcos. And my job was to make the manufacturing process work extremely well, eliminate any bottlenecks, eliminate inventory, eliminate work in process. And this is exactly the same methodology that the Phoenix Project is talking about, and it's inspired on a book by Eli Goldrath called The Goal and the Theory of Constraints. And I highly recommend to anybody listening to this podcast to really read the Phoenix Project. It is a great read, and it's so applicable to modern day IT today and how you basically build efficiency and workflow into the IT process to eliminate these bottlenecks that so many enterprises are experiencing with IT today.
And John, so let me ask you this then, based off of what we had just talked about, is this something you're actually seeing in a lot of enterprises today, or is this more of like, this is an ideal goal? What, like if you had to give, the enterprise, most enterprise customers, your typical enterprise customer, a score, right? A to F, right? Where do most enterprises fall in this kind of DevOps journey? And also kind of, I guess it's a follow-on question, how could PaaS enhance this or help them?
Most of the enterprises that I've worked with and I've worked at over the years are definitely verging up on the D to F kind of range.
I didn't want to say it. I was going to let you say it.
It's actually a good thing in a way. It's a great opportunity. It's just an area that just needs to be addressed, and it is being addressed now. But yeah, clearly, I mean, the last company I was at not too long ago, just over a year ago, it would take easily 2 weeks for a developer's request to spin up a database to be fulfilled. You submit a ticket and basically just wait, and eventually you'll get your database instance spun up, and that's just not going to work these days. And it's scary, but it's a very common situation on a lot of the people I talk to. There are some leading edge, innovative companies that are moving past that, and obviously that trend is going to continue greatly.
Sure.
Go ahead, Bart. Sorry. I just wanted to add, Aaron, to John's comment is that John is dealing with the developers and the DevOps IT folks. So in my role, I spend a lot of time with the CTOs, CIOs, and we hear the similar message is that in order to do development and provisioning, deployment, it takes weeks or months in these organizations, and they need to figure out a better way to do it because this is way too long. The manufacturing life cycle, so to speak, stealing from the Phoenix Project, is much too long. It needs to be shortened. The cycle time has to be shortened, and that's where PaaS potentially comes in as a part of the solution.
Sure.
So if I can interject here too, I had an epiphany last year after working at all these various companies where it would take all this time to provision a system to get it ready to develop on, and then I installed Staccato and was able to do it in literally minutes, and it almost shocked me. And it was after that I decided I needed to join this company and work with this product because it is so powerful.
Sure, and what are some of the, if you're taking a struggling enterprise, if I use that term, right, what are some of the entry-level use cases or that low-hanging fruit that you typically will help them address first?
So immediately off the top, most enterprise projects involve multiple programming languages, and to some extent, usually they're focused on one language. Let's say Java or something, but then there are small pieces that make much more sense to work on in another language. Like Ruby for test orchestration is a good example. And obviously, most apps these days have JavaScript components just for no reason than it's required in the browser, but that's spreading as well. So the first low-hanging fruit is the ability to deploy an app using pretty much any enterprise language. Also, frameworks, any of the runtimes, deploy them immediately.
Sure. And now let me ask you guys this. One maybe knock that I've heard once upon a time, and I don't know if it's specific to yours or if it's maybe honestly more applied to, say, a public PaaS, is the concept of almost locking you into that framework. Tell me a little bit, is that a valid concern, and why or why not?
So it is a valid concern. You're right. So when you talk about public PaaS, that is a valid concern. And that's one of the things that we knew our customers and prospective customers would be very concerned about. So when we talk about Staccato, but I also apply this to private PaaS in general, is that our mindset or mantra is any language, any stack, any cloud. So what you do is you have a common platform. It's based on open source, this common PaaS platform, and you can work with any language you want. So you don't have language lock-in. The next thing is you can work with any stack you want. You can choose the framework, the databases, the messaging services, the web servers that you care about. And you can work with any cloud. So you can work on your own vSphere private cloud, or you can maybe work on an OpenStack cloud or a CloudStack cloud. Doesn't matter to us. And then most likely what we see today is that people start with their vSphere cloud because predominantly that's what you see. And then they want to experiment with OpenStack. So they have that complete freedom to move. And then they want to experiment and maybe burst out to public cloud, maybe Amazon or HP Cloud Services or Rackspace. So with a PaaS layer, you avoid that lock-in. You don't have any lock-in in any of the dimensions I just discussed. Now, you could argue that, wait a minute, what about the PaaS layer? Aren't you locked into the PaaS layer? Your PaaS layer, and John can expand on this, is a means for managing and deploying your applications. You abstract your applications from the infrastructure, so you can move your application and use a different private PaaS if you want. And the other thing is, it's because we're based on open source, you also have the freedom that that the PaaS layer is based on an open source project. I don't know, John, if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, I would like to. I have a Java background, and I've been spending a lot of time deploying Java apps to Staccato. And I find that almost all of them work straight out of the box with very little, if any, modification. So the point is, there's very little glue required to get an application running in Staccato. As I say, most of the time you just take an existing Java application and push it to the PaaS, and it just works first time. So as a result, it would also be easily portable to other platform as a service offerings as well. Gotcha. Okay.
And Aaron, just to close the question, is that I think where the knock has been on is more on public platform as a service, where you have certain platform as a services where you only can work on one specific cloud, a couple of languages, maybe certain databases, and there is more of a lock-in. And if you want to work outside of that, you can't. That doesn't mean it doesn't prevent you from moving your application, but you don't have as much freedom as if, and that was the whole mindset behind coming up with our offering around private PaaS.
Gotcha. Okay. So, and let me ask you this. This is a kind of a theory I've had, but I haven't had experts like y'all to really run this by. So I'm going to run something by you here. And this wasn't in the show notes, so this is completely off the cuff here. So we're going without a net here for a second. But I had a theory that a lot of, if you kind of follow a lot of the really, really strong-willed and strong-opinioned people on Twitter about, if it's not written this way, it's not a cloud, and if it's not written this way, it's not a cloud, et cetera, et cetera. And they're really kind of knocking a lot of enterprises and a lot of enterprise applications, that those enterprise applications almost need to be completely rewritten from the ground up in a quote-unquote cloud-friendly way. And what I'm wondering is that true in your experience? Because, in my experience in talking to customers, I tend to more deal with the infrastructure layers, but they're not necessarily interested in rewriting all of those applications right now. It's really honestly more about, I want to make the infrastructure more agile today, and I'm going to get to those applications. It's almost like they have a much longer life cycle than, say, the infrastructure does. And so, are you seeing that? Or again, maybe going back to that low-hanging fruit question, are they just maybe porting over the older applications and maybe modifying them a little bit? Or, tell me a little bit about that.
Right. So, well, obviously there's a large number of legacy enterprise applications out there, and it only makes sense that those would also be supported. Whether or not they would be considered cloud applications or not, that's a matter of debate. But the truth is, after you deploy it on the cloud, it effectively is a cloud application. But in order to take advantage of the cloud, really, there's a lot of, best practices you might want to follow to make it truly scale. And there's, standard practices like statelessness and a few other things that help that out. I wouldn't say an application isn't a cloud application just because it doesn't follow a lot of these practices. If it can be deployed in a cloud environment, then it would be considered as such, although it can't maybe take advantage of the high degree of scalability, et cetera.
Sure.
And, Aaron, this is an interesting question because I think you hear that knock, but enterprises are enterprises, and our job is to help enterprises walk before they run. And as I was thinking on your question, I was thinking, well, let's look at when Lotus or Excel came out as a spreadsheet. If you look at this as a solution for people to work with numbers, it does the basic addition, the basic things, and that's not exciting. But you start using it to do basic math functions, and then all of a sudden you start seeing the power of it. And then you start using Excel, or in the old days, Lotus, in a way that you've never done before. And there's all the different things, the pivot tables, VLOOKUP, if statements, and things like that you never could do before with a simple calculator. So the point I'm trying to make with this metaphor is that you need to make it easy for enterprises to first work with their existing applications that they're used to, move them to the cloud. Now that you've given them a platform, they're comfortable with it, and then they can start building cloud-enabled applications to really get the benefits of the cloud based on an application deployment platform such as a PaaS. To me, what we're doing is we're helping enterprises walk before they run.
That's perfect. I like that. Absolutely. Go ahead.
Oh, yeah. Actually, I'll let you continue. I'll continue that thought later.
Okay, that's fine. So I was actually going to go in a slightly different direction here and just ask you a little bit about your involvement with Cloud Foundry. So ActiveState has been involved from a very early on with the Cloud Foundry project, but at the same time, Staccato is different from, say, just base Cloud Foundry. Yeah, and actually, I'll put a link in the show notes about it. But off of your website, you kind of have the comparison breakdown of here's Cloud Foundry, here's Staccato. Tell us a little bit about how you actually do you like pull from them and then do some modifications, and how does your actual development cycles and how do you choose what is, say, Cloud Foundry Plus, if I use that term, right?
Okay, well, yeah, so we've been working with Cloud Foundry ever since its first release back in 2011, and we've been contributing back to the project itself based on a lot of the things we have been working on over the years. But we did find that at a point it made more sense for us to actually fork their distribution and enhance it fairly significantly in a large number of ways. And what I'll do now is just list some of those ways, and then if you'd like, we could dive into some of them. But we use the LXC containers, the secure Linux containers, to ensure that the application instances are isolated and cannot affect each other. We provide a powerful management console, a web-based console that can be used to manage the PaaS itself, all aspects of it. We have a user and group facility allowing you to create multiple users as part of groups that have their own limits, resource limits defined to make sure that the resources, the quotas won't be exceeded. A couple of things I want to just draw your attention to is log streaming. So the ability to take an application that might be running multiple instances on on your PaaS, like dozens, hundreds of instances, and aggregate those logs and then send them either to a logging aggregation service like Loggly or Splunk perhaps, or just capturing them yourselves. It's built into Staccato, and it's incredibly easy to manage the logs. And one more point is we also have support for any basically network protocols over any ports. We're not restricted to HTTP over the, let's say 80 and 443. We have a facility allowing an application to communicate with the outside world over any port using any protocol, and Staccato takes care of load balancing the traffic. There's a number of other differentiators as well, but that's a start.
Sure. And go ahead, Bart. Go ahead.
Yeah, so Aaron, what I wanted to say is that John was really talking about the details, and I wanted to share the philosophy at ActiveState when it comes to open source. Every product that we have is built on top of open source. So whether it's our language distributions of Perl, Tcl, and Python, we have a commercial proprietary version of those. Our IDE, Komodo, is based on the Mozilla open source platform. And similarly, our Staccato is based on the Cloud Foundry platform. And what we do, though, is we build these products with our target markets in mind. And our activities are really influenced by our customers. Our customers drive us each and every day and say, can you do this? Can you do that? If you look at Staccato's evolution, I would say 95% of the feature set has been driven by our customers saying, we need this, we need it right away. And that's how we approach open source, because at the end of the day, we make open source work for the enterprise in a what we call a shrink-wrapped, out-of-box experience. We make it really easy for enterprises to work with open source.
Perfect.
I'd like to add one more thing to that, too, that I didn't mention earlier, is that Staccato is fully backward compatible with Cloud Foundry. So if an app works on Cloud Foundry, it'll work on Staccato. It also means that any plugins and third-party tools that work with Cloud Foundry, like the Eclipse Spring Tool Suite plugin, etc., will work fine with Staccato as well. So it's fully compatible.
Very cool. And I just wanted to elaborate real quickly on, because for me, because I've really been digging into some of the underlying technologies of the various platform as a service vendors, but one kind of common thing I'm seeing that's actually kind of new for me as kind of an infrastructure person that I wanted to bring up, because a lot of our listeners, we have more infrastructure and operations people than we probably do developers, is the concept of containers for isolation as opposed to isolating, say, at the virtual machine or the operating system level. And to me, that was very fascinating and very almost like a new way for me to think about things, because I kind of grew up in the virtualization world, and it's one of those, like the typical, it's a VM, that VM has an OS, that OS has some apps, it might have a database, but everything is its own instance as opposed to this concept of containers. Can you talk a little bit more about that briefly?
Sure. So the containers bring a lot of power to this whole PaaS environment or infrastructure. So one thing that they allow is you can specify the resources allocated to any individual container instance, I guess. And what that means is you can maximize the number of applications that will run on a VM very simply. So typically you'd have a VM or multiple VMs, but they'd have dozens of application instances running in the containers. They're all completely isolated, but you can maximize the number of container instances you have on a VM. So you're packing as much as you can on the VM. They also have a lot of the ability to isolate the applications based on namespaces. So an application would have its own notion of what other applications or processes are running in that container. It would have its own notion of the network, really, and things like the DNS or the host name, at least, that the app is running in. And it's completely separate. Each application instance has no impact or ability to impact another application instance. So you can do some of this with just standard VMs, but it's a much more efficient and rapid way to go about building up a large application made up of multiple components.
And John, I don't know your age, and I'm not going to ask it now. But Bart said earlier he was 25 years in IT, so hopefully he'll be able to relate to this one. But as an old IBM person, it reminds me very much of going back to the mainframe and AS400 days of LPARs or logical partitions.
Yeah.
So that's I completely just aged myself with this podcast right there.
It's funny how this industry evolves. It seems to keep going back and forth between various technologies. Things like thin client has been around back since the 3270 days.
Exactly.
It's coming back and going away and coming back. It's bizarre.
Yep, absolutely. So in another 5 years, client server will be cool again.
In a different incarnation.
So I'll go back to the Cloud Foundry for a second. I just wanted to get your impressions on, Pivotal recently announced or re-announced, or however you want to really look at that, and so what does that potentially, in your opinion, do to the Cloud Foundry ecosystem, and how does it maybe evolve over time?
Well, the jury's still out, but we're optimistic that we actually think it's going to help make a better Cloud Foundry ecosystem. And why I say that is if you look at where Cloud Foundry started, it started within VMware, which is not traditionally known as an open source organization. And so with the initial versions of Cloud Foundry and working with the community, it was not a community that we as ActiveState are used to dealing with. It was a little bit more structured, so to speak. But now with the Pivotal initiative, we are cautiously optimistic that actually we're going to see a much more open and engaging collaborative community as they get their feet rolling here, because they effectively Pivotal Inc. was established in April 1, I think it was. And so we're very actively involved with the guys at the Cloud Foundry Pivotal right now on a regular weekly basis. But we're encouraged that we think going forward, we're going to see a much more robust and vibrant open source community.
Awesome.
So one thing I'll add to that too is that I was, in a way, it's a very positive thing seeing a large, basically investment in PaaS like that. Just illustrates the power of it. That they're willing to invest, what is it, $1 billion and a large team to just work on PaaS and the entire ecosystem. So it just validates the approach we're taking, especially given that we're Cloud Foundry based as well.
Sure. And so, kind of change topics here slightly and go back to enterprise for a second. One of the biggest challenges I've always seen, and you certainly hear it over and over again, of just anything as a service, is you almost get to a point where the technology is the easy part. The people, the process, a lot of politics, whatever you want to call it, within an enterprise seems to be a sticking point at times. Certainly more so than the technology. Do you see that as well in the platform as a service space, and does DevOps relate to that in any way?
Oh man, it's so well said. You're right. The technology is almost the easy part. I know you've hinted on this, and actually, what I'm about to say, I know, Aaron, you've hit it on in other broadcasts, is that the PaaS space, specifically private PaaS, is still in early market, early days, and what we've seen is that where things really start to take off in an organization, if IT DevOps is leading a private PaaS initiative, that seems to work much better, and they work with their developers and say, hey, check this out. And then it goes much smoother. The converse is if a development team finds something like private PaaS and want to bring it into the organization in a grand scale way, and IT DevOps doesn't see it as a priority, we've seen a lot of deals killed because IT DevOps says, no, we're not interested right now. So the people aspects, the political aspects of, as you say, anything as a service is, to me, the biggest barrier to making private PaaS successful in the enterprise. I think you've hit on a really interesting point.
Yeah, maybe I'll add to that as well, just a little bit. But for the last several months, I've been very focused on the developer mindset and just looking at how Staccato and PaaS can enhance the developer's life. And what I've come to realize, especially with input from the rest of ActiveState, is that convincing a developer is not enough enough, as Bart just said, to move it forward. It is the DevOps people and the people that make those decisions that have to be convinced as well.
Sure.
And the other thing, Aaron, is that you hear the stereotype of IT DevOps butting head with developers, and you hear this over and over again, the tensions. Actually, what we have seen, private PaaS is a collaboration mechanism between the different parts of the organization. So if it's led by IT DevOps and they involve the developers, both groups go, wow, this is a great way to collaborate, because the developers are now given the freedom to do things they weren't allowed to do before because IT said they couldn't do it. And IT DevOps is being able to say to developers, here, you can self-service yourself with private PaaS. That frees me up to work on other things. And this whole aspect of manufacturing, again, in the IT organization, IT DevOps is no longer becoming a constraint because they're able to remove bottlenecks where they're getting in the way of getting things done for the organization. So my point is that from a relationship aspect, platform as a service is actually a wonderful collaboration mechanism between these different groups in the enterprise.
And do you actually, so going back to, I worked for a reseller years ago, and going back to my reseller days where I would actually do the pre-sales as well as the post-sales, so the actual installations. And what I actually found a lot of times was installing the product wasn't enough, because you actually, like you were saying, you had to educate the people, educate the process. And actually, I would spend as much time, if not sometimes 2 and 3 times more time in the organization just trying to make sure the tool that you installed was successful. In addition to, you can't just kind of walk in, install the shiny tool, and then walk out the door.
Exactly. Yeah, there's a lot of work that needs to be involved, and it's mainly in education and getting the light bulb to go off in these people to see exactly the power of it. And that's a big challenge, but it's definitely a achievable challenge.
And you're right, Aaron. And so what typically happens, and each enterprise is slightly different from the installations we've done to date, but you sell them a platform, being Staccato or private PaaS platform. You sell them so many VMs, and then in addition, often we're selling training. We are going in there and training organizations. We may be doing migration services for specific groups. We're helping them migrate their applications to the cloud. Other groups, they want specific things customized that are unique to their workflow, and they want us to work with them. There is specific things we're doing on applications or databases. So it's not just about the platform. You're right. It's platform plus services.
So based on all of that, what I was wondering is there kind of an enterprise when you're looking at them that, this is going to be a successful enterprise, or this enterprise is going to have, say, some challenges, right? What is a stereotypical successful enterprise look like from your eyes?
Well, right now, a successful enterprise to us is one that they have their cloud infrastructure in place. So they figured out their virtualization, they figured out their infrastructure as a service, and they're now wanting to push the envelope and say, let's get more out of our cloud investment. And they understand platform as a service. So these are the ones that we know when they come to us and they have their specific PaaS questions in place, they're ready to go and they're serious about this. As opposed to, there are a number of enterprises out there that are just trying to understand the cloud and what it can mean to them and what is PaaS, and that's much more of an education. And so we spend time with them, but to get to the heart of your question, we know those ones, this is not a priority. They're still educating themselves. Whereas the first example I gave, you get a real feeling they're ready to go. And the other thing is that you either hear from a development team that also has the endorsement of IT DevOps, as I was referring to earlier, Aaron, or you have an IT DevOps person that really wants to champion this and make it happen. And I guess the other aspect of success is if you see both buy-in at the bottom up as well as the top down. You see that, and we see this typically in a number of organizations where that's alignment, then things move extremely quickly. Now, John, I don't know if you want to expand on it, because I know you have some firsthand experience as well, so you might want to provide some additional insight.
Yeah, I'd like to address that first comment you said about education, about understanding of PaaS, and it's just bizarre. In very short time period, the last 6 or 8 months, I've been paying close attention to the understanding of the attendees. And 8 months ago, I'd go to cloud-centric events and discover that many or most of the attendees did not know what PaaS was, and many hadn't even heard of it. And that is changing rapidly. Almost every month, I can see the increase. It's a big trend. So it's a difficult problem to educate these enterprises that have never heard of PaaS, but they're becoming less common, I guess you could say.
Sure, understand. Okay. Well, guys, we're kind of hitting up against that mark where we're getting longer than your typical car commute, and you never know, my internet probably might bounce back down at any second. So we're going to go ahead and wrap this up. So we're out of time for this week, guys. So Bart and John, where can everyone find out more about ActiveState, the products, and where you guys are going to be this summer, and kind of follow everything you guys have going?
Yeah, so you can find us at www.activestate.com, and you can follow the links to Staccato right from our homepage. We are going to be at a number of events in June, extremely busy. And between John and I think we can fill in the blanks. We're going to be at Cloud Expo in New York City. We're going to be at Velocity. We're going to be at HP Discover, GlueCon, QCon in New York. We've got DevOps days in the Valley. John, you're going to that, I think?
Yes.
What have I missed? There's a couple but you're getting the idea, Aaron. We're going to be at a lot of places. Yeah.
That sounds great. Well, good.
There's also a crazy number of cloud events just in the Bay Area here. They're just almost every night. I'm actually at one right now. I'm going to be heading right back in. They're everywhere. And
we appreciate your dedication then. So guys, like I said, we're out of time for this week, and apologize. Brian was not able to make the call tonight. He's actually on an airplane flying home from a customer tonight. But certainly, if you like the show, please tell a friend or leave us a review on iTunes. You can also follow us on Twitter at TheCloudcastNet or on the web at thecloudcast.net, where you can find links to everything Cloudcast. Thanks for listening.